My fellow Nigerians, as your future president, I naturally have to comment on the passing of one of my predecessors, former President Muhammadu Buhari, who has just been laid to rest. First, condolences to his widow, former First Lady Aisha Buhari, his son Yusuf Buhari, the rest of their family, and his close aides and associates. Now, as one of only two Nigerians to have served both as Nigeria's military head of state and a democratically elected president, the other being former President Olusegun Obasanjo, Buhari clearly had a blessed life. And that's particularly why it is very disappointing to me, a Nigerian patriot, that he died in a hospital in London in the UK. It's such a shame that in 2025, most of our former and current leaders only seek medical care abroad. In fact, speaking soon after Buhari's passing, former military head of state Abdul Salami Abubakar said he had just been discharged from that very same hospital in London. Meanwhile, Buhari's successor, Bola Tinubu, regularly travels to France for medical care. The only top Nigerian leader who bucked this trend is Buhari's vice president, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, who in 2022 showed patriotism and exemplary leadership by having a surgery at the Duchess International Hospital in Lagos. Buhari or his family should have opted for a Nigerian hospital whether or not they knew he was dying. He could have gone, for example, to the recently commissioned World-Class African Medical Center of Excellence in Abuja. If that had happened, headlines about the location of his death would have automatically become free publicity for Nigeria's medical capabilities. Indeed, I am glad and encouraged that in their various reactions to President Buhari's passing, many of our fellow Nigerians have spoken up about this particular issue, so much so that Femi Adesina, Buhari's special advisor on media and publicity, felt obliged to respond during a Channel TV interview. Adesina attempted to justify Buhari seeking medical attention in the UK by arguing that, and I quote, if he had said I will do my medicals in Nigeria just as a show off or something, he could have long been dead because there may not be the expertise needed in the country, end of quote. As if that was not enough, Adesina further weakened his entire premise by saying, and I quote, so those who glibly talk of going abroad, they don't know that a man needs to be alive first before he can effect a change, end of quote. The first problem you see with Adesina's thinking is that it is extremely insensitive to say that Buhari, with everything he had at his disposal, would have died if he had used the same hospitals that millions of Nigerians are expected to depend on. Also, it is absolutely self-defeating to denigrate or belittle our brilliant and resilient Nigerian medical doctors and other healthcare workers who often have to put up with deplorable working conditions. Finally, to Adesina's point about Buhari needing the British medical system to keep him alive before he can effect a change in Nigeria, well, since Buhari was president for 8 years and before that, military ruler for 20 months, Adesina should simply tell us the change Buhari effected in our healthcare system that Nigerians can be proud of. Otherwise, he absolutely owes Nigerians, and especially our medical professionals, a public apology for such great folly of his. Beyond that, what is my take on Buhari's legacy? I would say it's a mixed bag. On the one hand, there was the far-reaching war against indiscipline campaign during his military rule between 1984 and 1985 to curb corruption and criminality. Sadly, there was also, on the other hand, his overall poor record as president between 2015 and 2023. That said, it's important to point out that the economic difficulties Nigeria experienced under Buhari's presidency were largely due to factors beyond his direct control. Let me explain. The 2015 oil price crash, which happened just around when Buhari took office, severely damaged Nigeria's economy, causing a recession and a decline in our people's living standards. Oil prices dropped from around $112 per barrel in 2014 to below $50 in 2015. Things were so bad that Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, the current World Trade Organization Director General and then President Goodluck Jonathan's coordinating minister for the economy, publicly lamented that Jonathan hadn't saved during the oil boom years and said that the economy was going to be in a very bad shape no matter who won the 2015 presidential election. Then in 2020, three years after Buhari and Osinbajo pulled the economy from recession in 2017, COVID happened. By the time the price of oil recovered to pre-2015 levels around 2022, due to US and European Union sanctions on Russia, COVID disruptions had already made it very difficult for a developing country like Nigeria to attract the kind of investment we need. Yes, Buhari should absolutely have done a lot more to diversify our economy because, of course, as long as we still have our oil dependency, any significant drop in the price of oil in the world market will definitely hurt our economy and our people's living standards. And yes, it is precisely because our economy isn't diversified that it just didn't make sense for Bola Tinubu to have floated the Naira on June 14, 2023, just 2 weeks after taking office. Floating the Naira when our manufacturing sector is so very weak was a very stupid move. Within 1 year of taking office, we went from 600 Naira per US dollar to 1,600 Naira per US dollar. To President Buhari's credit, he refused to float the Naira because he understood that our production capacity was weak and, of course, is still weak. In the 2016 Al Jazeera interview, Buhari said, and I quote, "Countries that play around with their currencies are countries that have enormous production capacity. Nigeria virtually imports everything," end of quote. After the Al Jazeera journalist challenged Buhari by saying Nigeria was going against the advice of the IMF by not devaluing the Naira, Buhari replied, and I quote, "Why not? If it is against our national interests, why can't we go against the IMF advice?" End of quote. Indeed, Peter Obi, my preferred candidate for 2027, agrees. Criticizing Tinubu, Obi recently said, and I quote, "You cannot float the Naira when you have not moved the country's economy from consumption to production." End of quote. That said, I wish Buhari was more decisive on other pertinent issues like insecurity and the fight against corruption. On insecurity, for example, given the cult followership he had in the north and the enormous goodwill he enjoyed in many parts of the south prior to 2015, that is, he could and should have taken decisive action to end the farmer-herder clashes, which sadly led to so much bloodshed. He could have also pushed for state police to allow states to lead the way on security, which, of course, as we all know, is the government's first duty. Regarding corruption, it is good that President Buhari fully implemented the Treasury single account policy, which was proposed under President Jonathan to curb fraud and enhance transparency and efficiency in the management of the federal government's finances. But how Hadi Sirika, Buhari's aviation minister, unveiled Nigeria Air as a new national carrier just 48 hours before they left office, in what later turned out to be a big scam, and how the cabinet apparently approved virtually all the documents Sirika presented without proper scrutiny, is beyond belief. If Buhari had been half as tough as his vice president, Yemi Osinbajo, had been during his stint as acting president, the impunity of people like Sirika would have been properly dealt with. Recall that Osinbajo, as acting president back in August 2018, sacked the Director General of the SSS, Lawal Dawara, after his operatives stormed and blocked access to the National Assembly complex. It was sadly that same kind of impunity that led to the deadly EndSARS protests of 2020. In fact, I was also very disappointed when Buhari accepted the resignation of then Finance Minister Kemi Adeosun, one of the bright lights of his cabinet, over an excusable oversight regarding her NYC exemption certificate. I say so because Adeosun was targeted by corrupt special interest groups after she embarked on bold fiscal reforms and questioned revenues remitted to the federal government by the NNPC because they were less than expected given the raised crude oil prices at the time. So Buhari should absolutely have instead backed her. Doing so would have signaled that he was going to take decisive action against high-level official corruption. What a missed opportunity that was. In addition, by the time he left office in May 2023, nothing tangible had come out of the 6-year Siemens Presidential Power Initiative, which Buhari signed in 2019 with the Germans, and which was supposed to lead to the production of at least 25,000 megawatts of power by this year, 2025. But to be fair, COVID was a big reason for the lack of any visible progress on that deal. That said, it will be totally unfair to not acknowledge that Buhari recorded remarkable success in the area of transportation. From the construction of the Lagos-Ibadan Railway to the completion of the Warri-Takpe Railway and the Abuja-Kaduna Railway, as well as the commencement and completion of the Lekki Seaport and the Integrated Maritime Surveillance and Security Infrastructure Project, which led to Nigeria being removed from a list of high-risk maritime countries by the International Maritime Bureau, it is clear that Buhari did very well on that front. Ultimately, for all of Buhari's flaws, it is good that he had the presence of mind to apologize to Nigerians before leaving the presidency. On one occasion, he said, and I quote, "Whoever thought that there had been some form of injustice on him? We are all humans. There is no doubt I hurt some people and I wish they will pardon me. And those that think that I have hurt them so much, please pardon me." End of quote. Also, in a farewell speech on May 28, 2023, Buhari said, and I quote, "Some of the measures we introduced led to pain and suffering, for which I sincerely apologize." End of quote. May President Muhammadu Buhari rest in peace. And may we all learn useful lessons from his life and presidency, lessons that will help us to build a better and more prosperous Nigeria. May God bless you, and may God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.